Hello, today's lecture topic is legal issues of running a startup business, and we will learn such questions as how to register a startup in Ukraine, favorable tax jurisdictions for startups, agreements in startup and taxation of investments, and what is intellectual property. So, how to register a startup in Ukraine? A startup is not only a creator, he or she at the early stages is also a manager, a market specialist, or a lawyer, and has to deal with various issues of the project. At some point of the project, there is a need to legalize activity for attracting investment, scaling production, and sales. It entails paying taxes, protection of intellectual property, cooperation with angel and venture investors, banks, or stock markets. All decisions regarding legal registration of a startup should be based on the optimization of administration and taxation, territorial preferences, and reliability from investors' point of view. It is always a choice between two alternatives: national registration and registration in favorable jurisdictions. In Ukraine, it is possible to register several forms of business. First is individual entrepreneurship. You run your business individually, take all the risks, but own all the profits or losses. Or it can be a legal entity, private enterprise, which you own solely. Second form is partnership. When you run a business with your partners and each of you owns a certain share of the company. There are several types of legal partnerships like full partnership, limited partnership, company with additional liability, or limited liability partnership, or LLC. However, only last form is the most widespread in Ukraine because it is well regulated and has significant benefit for its participants, like limited liability, so each partner is responsible only within the limits of his share in the charter capital. Private enterprise is also a possible legal form of partnership as due to national legislation, it can be founded both by one person or more people, but it is not well regulated considering the features of startup business. LLC starts with the general meeting of founders, the decision of which is recorded in the protocol. Next, the charter of the company should be drawn up. Only then you apply to the state registration authorities. And the third form is corporation. It's organizational form when you accumulate charter capital by selling the shares of your company to potential shareholders. It makes sense when you have opportunities to attract important capital to your startup business, when a startup has got some reputation, conquered significant and stable market share. Its legal form is joint stock company, public or private. Let's consider the advantages and disadvantages of these organizational forms. For individual entrepreneurs, there are two major options for registration. First, all team members register as individual entrepreneurs of the third group of the unified or simplified tax system. You and your team members individually receive honorarium or payments from the customer. Advantages of the scheme: each team member pays its own tax and no complicated accounting is required. You can receive revenues in foreign currency and make exchanges via the bank system. It is not regulated to whom to sell goods or services. And disadvantages of the scheme: lots of bank accounts, as many as the number of team members, which is not convenient for the customer. High charges for banking services for currency transfer. There is a limit for the annual revenue, only 1,167 minimal wages, established for the 1st of January of the current year. In 2023, the minimum wage is 6,700 hryvnias, so the annual limit for your revenue is 7,818,900 hryvnias. Also, there are some constraints imposed on allowed types of economic activities. Second option is when CEO registers as individual entrepreneur of the third group of unified tax system and hires all team members as employees concluding an employment contract. This is the simplest legal form of employment in terms of interaction with regulatory bodies. During inspections, there is no need to contrive why these people are in your office. However, the salaries of your employees will be charged much more. What taxes does an individual entrepreneur pay? When it is option A, he must pay a single tax of 5% from the income or optionally 3% plus 20% of value added tax. Sometimes it is advantageous for business when your production is material intensive, but it is not the case of IT sphere while it is exempt from value added tax. Then you pay a single social contribution to provide for your future pension. 22% from minimal wage established for the 1st of January of the current year. In 2023, this sum is 1,474 hryvnias per month. If a startup chooses option B and hires his team members, he pays a single social contribution, which is 22% from monthly salary fund. Also, he becomes a tax agent for his employees and is responsible for withholding and remittance of 18% of personal income tax plus 1.5% of military duty at the cost of employee. Let's investigate a partnership's advantages and disadvantages. In the partnership, we consider only limited liability company or LLC. An advantage over, for example, a private enterprise is that the composition of partners has no legislative limits. It can be created by individuals or legal entities or both. And there are no restrictions regarding the chosen types of economic activities. The disadvantages are that this business requires permanent administrative costs, like the company must be managed by a director, CEO, and organize the accounting by hiring accountant or outsourcing accounting services, and constantly report to various authorities, in particular to the tax service, statistical bodies, etc. There are some restrictions for the director's activity. In some cases, he must obtain the consent of the partners to sign a contract. Of course, you need to name the company, maybe to rent an office and to contribute some money or other assets to charter capital. It should be at least 1 hryvnia due to national legislation. But this type of organization looks more reliable for investors, it is more stable, but it is worth running only when you are already moving to the production stage and some sales. LLC can choose one of the taxation systems, unified single tax as for individual entrepreneur, but all team members, including CEO, are hired people. Or universal tax system where you must pay a tax on profit 18%, value added tax 20% if the sum of operations during last 12 months exceeds 1 million hryvnias, and single social contribution from salary fund at the rate of 22%. How to register? Now you have an opportunity to register as an individual entrepreneur via DIA, Digital Public Service. It will take only several minutes and registration will be ready in 2 working days. The registration is free of charge. You need a digital key, file key from your organization or your bank to identify yourself both in DIA and the electronic office of the taxpayer. Also, you must register with the tax office at your place of residence. You can do it electronically via electronic cabinet of the taxpayer. You may communicate with public authorities both via digital services and personally. In nowadays, digital services are preferable because they don't require to visit any state bodies. You can also take your laptop and register while drinking coffee. For LLC, you can also use digital service DIA, but you need all the package of the document, a protocol, a charter, all the partner's personal data. The registration will take several minutes or 1 working day on some conditions. There is no registration fee. After registration, it is required to open an account in the bank to make payments to your counterparties and budget and to receive revenues. You can also use regular registration when you submit documents personally or via regular mail. In this situation, you need to go to public registration authorities and a tax service. There is a new opportunity for Ukrainian IT startups to register for a special regime of economic activity residence in DIA city. A startup should meet several requirements to utilize it. First, a startup must be a legal entity and be engaged in the activities concerning IT, software development, machine building using IT, cyber security, etc. Second, all hired people at any type of contract must receive an average monthly salary not less than 1,200 euros. 3. The number of personnel should be not less than 9 people. 4. The amount of qualified income, sum of net revenue from sales and royalty, is not less than 90% of total income. The regime is aimed at ensuring the minimum tax burden on residents of the city. Another advantage is that the venture investments are protected under the English law. A startup may choose the format of personal recruitment under the labor code, contract with individual entrepreneur, or gig contract. The disadvantages are uncertainty of public policy in post-war period, long consideration of the application only for legal entities, limitations on cooperations with individual entrepreneurs, less opportunities for reinvesting the profit because you should keep the certain level of salaries, you are under the microscope, special regulation and control of government bodies, and limits on annual income. This regime allows exit capital tax at the rate of 9% on employees' personal income and at the rate of 5%, and single social contribution at the rate of 22% from minimal wage. Startups can apply if their annual revenue is not more than 7.5 million hryvnias yearly. To register a joint stock company is reasonable when a startup needs to involve various stakeholders and investors in business. Its charter capital should not be less than 200 minimal wages. In 2023, this sum equals 1,340,000 hryvnias. However, the registration procedure is quite complicated. The transparent distribution of shares required developed stock market, which is absent in Ukraine. Sometimes it is worth to consider registration in some tax jurisdictions. The institutional environment in Ukraine is not stable due to war, corruption, weak capital markets, so often startups prefer to register in other jurisdictions. If a startup intends to enter the European market, Estonia can be considered as a prospective jurisdiction. Formally, Estonia is not a tax haven because its taxes are comparable to other European countries. Estonia is at the forefront of digital development. All taxation is made digital and it is very convenient. The registration is rapid through Estonian public e-services. Here you get higher protection of your intellectual property and access to European market. If you want to conquer the world with your product and keep venture investments safe, you may choose to register at State of Delaware in the United States of America. Nicknamed the Diamond State, Delaware is well known for its extremely business-friendly corporate laws. Registration in Estonia requires some extra expenses, like find a contact person and legal address provision, bank accounts, and registration fee of 265 euros. Total tax burden is close to Ukrainian system. When you register at State of Delaware, you receive such benefits: no corporate tax for income derived from outside United States, no sales tax imposed in Delaware, enhanced privacy in company information and records, fast and simple incorporation system, no requirements for auditing and financial reporting, no exchange control or any other currency legislation, modern and friendly corporate legislation. You need to hire a professional registered agent, to pay for local registered office, to pay for a bank account, and to pay for registration. So, in total, your costs will be up to 1,500 United States dollars. Other most rated jurisdictions include Cyprus, Romania, Georgia, Hong Kong, the United Arab Emirates, Singapore, Gibraltar, Poland, Portugal, and Turkey. If you want to continue your startup activity in Ukraine and physically you and your team stay in Ukraine, you should register a permanent representative office and agent agreement while your legal entity abroad continues to receive revenues and investments. Choosing a jurisdiction for registration, think about your core market and your potential investors. Next is agreements in startup and taxation of investments. It is very important to establish relations with the co-owners of the idea and at the beginning of the introduction of the startup and its registration. Quite often, startup participants are so focused on the project itself that issues of intellectual property, profit sharing, duties and functions of each team member are not clearly defined or legally formalized at the beginning. Thus, if you are starting as an individual entrepreneur, it can be recommended that you enter into a joint activity agreement. If you are establishing a business in the form of LLC, then take seriously the drafting of the charter and the corporate agreement. This agreement will cover important considerations such as what decisions directors and shareholders can make, how often directors and shareholders will meet, the sale of shares, how dividends will be paid, selling the company, dispute resolution, and deed of accession about binding new shareholders to any pre-existing shareholders agreement. Never accept the charter or corporate agreement in the form of templates provided for a small fee. Savings at this stage can be very expensive in the future. So, write the charter and corporate agreement for your company with your lawyers. If your startup is registered as an individual entrepreneurship or LLC, any money or grants received, in particular for LLC, if it is received not as a share of charter capital, are considered taxable income or non-refundable financial aid and is taxed in accordance with the universal tax system. It means you must pay a personal income tax or tax on profit at the rate of 18%. For example, Ukrainian Startup Fund provides grants for legally registered startups. Assume the sum is $50,000. An individual entrepreneur or third group of the unified tax system will pay 18% of this amount as a tax and moreover 1.5% of military duty. It is 9,750 United States dollars in total. From this amount, a startup receives only $40,250. LLC will pay, regardless of the chosen taxation system, 18% of the profit. When LLC receives an investment as a contribution to the charter capital in the monetary form, no taxes are imposed. If it receives investments in the form of non-refundable financial aid, we apply the previous conditions.
Intellectual property rights. The last but not least legal issue essential for running a business is the issue of intellectual property and its protection. Intellectual property, or IP, covers creations of the mind such as inventions, logos, designs, literary and artistic works. IP is company's intangible assets and adds to its value. IP is protected in law by IP rights. IP rights are the exclusive rights awarded to an entity in exchange for disclosing innovation and creation. There are different types of IP and different ways of their protection. Some of them exist automatically after creation without any effort, as for example copyright, while others need verification and registration, like patents or designs. Dr. Alison Orr calls mentioned above IPRs the formal IP rights, and outlines that the IP family also includes non-physical IP you own, like trade secrets, processes, contracts, customer and supplier relationships, and intellectual capital you don't own but have the right to use, like your team and IP licensed to you. A single product or service you've created will imply tens of IP rights, the way it does for, let's say, an iPhone. Why does IP exist? To keep competitive advantage over competitors and market growth potential, to invest in further innovations, and to gain money for innovation actions through licensing, franchising, or selling, to protect legally from committing piracy and counterfeit of ideas that could damage the interests of the company, and to benefit the employees, who, according to the research, get 19% higher salaries at European firms that own IPRs compared to those that don't. Having all these benefits of the IPR, should we paint the town red? Not really. There might sometimes be the other side of the coin. For instance, patenting process will take on average 25 months before you get protected. Might cost you up to $50,000 per patent and do not guarantee you will earn money on that invention. As these aspects make the issue of IPR's protection complicated, they also prove that it is extremely important for your startups. Technology transfer offices and technology and innovation support centers at universities and research institutes will help you with the first steps. Find the nearest in your region and get started.